Hello, you're live with BBC News. I'm Anna Foster in the Jordanian capital, Amman. And in the escalating war with Iran, Israel has launched fresh strikes on Tehran and on the Lebanese capital, Beirut. These are live pictures that we can show you right now of the skyline in Beirut. We've seen throughout the day today those plumes of dark smoke rising into the sky with the Mediterranean Sea in the background there. Now, Israel has also sent ground troops into Lebanon to seize what it calls strategic areas, it says, to prevent attacks being launched at border communities.
But all of this comes, as we know, as Iran is continuing to strike back by targeting a number of Gulf states across the region, including Bahrain and Qatar. And drones have struck the U.S. embassy in Saudi Arabia overnight. President Trump saying today that Tehran wanted to talk, but it was, quote, too late.
The Iranian Red Crescent says 787 people have been killed in the country. And in a moment, we'll hear from our correspondents in Beirut and in Tel Aviv. But first, this report from Alison Freeman.
The strikes on Iran continue on what is now the fourth day of action by the US and Israel. The Iranian Red Crescent says the death toll there has reached almost 800. And as shown by these pictures released by the IDF, the offensive by the Israelis has also stepped up in Beirut to tackle the Iran-backed Hezbollah. This morning, the Israeli government announced it was sending troops in to take strategic areas. Iran has been striking back. This footage showing what appears to be Iranian missiles in the sky above Doha being intercepted. The streets of Riyadh are quieter due to the threat. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defence confirming that the US embassy there was attacked by 2 Iranian drones. And in Erbil, in northern Iraq, home to a US airbase, this footage from social media shows where a fragment of what's thought to be a drone tore through the roof of a residential building, landing in a family's apartment. The Americans say they're working through a list of military targets, filming their destruction of a missile launcher. And this satellite image shows an Iranian naval vessel on fire inside the sea wall in the port of Bandar Abbas. The US says there is still more action planned.
I'm not going to give away the details of our tactical efforts, but the hardest hits are yet to come from the US military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now. Someone was screaming, how long will it take? I don't know how long it'll take. We have objectives. We will do this as long as it takes to achieve those objectives, and we will achieve those objectives. The world will be a safer place when we're done with this operation.
Oil and gas prices have surged as Iran's retaliation across the Middle East continues. Ras Tanura, the Saudis' biggest oil refinery, was hit and forced to close. Around a fifth of the world's oil and gas pass through here, one of the world's most important shipping routes, the Strait of Hormuz. But an Iranian official has now warned that any ship who tries to pass through will be set on fire. The Iranians argue their retaliation is measured.
We target only the military objectives of the hostile forces. We don't target civilians. We don't target the interests of neighboring states. Under international law, every state has a duty not to allow its territory to be used for act of aggression against another state.
There's also been a warning of an ongoing security threat at the UK's RAF base at Kritiri in Cyprus after 2 drones were intercepted there on Monday. The conflict is coming at a cost to the Israelis too. People gathered in Jerusalem to mourn the deaths of 3 teenagers, but the Israeli government says it has no choice.
After we hit their nuclear sites and their ballistic missiles program, you'd think they learned a lesson, but they didn't, because they're unreformable. They're totally fanatic about this, about the goal of destroying America.
And the US government remains resolute about its continuing military action.
There's just no way that Donald Trump is going to allow this country to get into a multi-year conflict with no clear end in sight and no clear objective.
For now, though, the conflict continues with no sign of a ceasefire. Alison Freeman, BBC News.
Well, as this war continues to grow, we're bringing you the very latest from right across the Middle East region. I want to take you, first of all, to Lebanon and to Israel. Our correspondent, Wira Davis, is in Beirut and Hugo Beshega is in Tel Aviv. Wira, there has been a delicate, fairly unsteady ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon since the war at the end of 2024. But what you've been seeing over the last 24 hours or so is right back, isn't it, to that wartime situation?
Yeah, hi Anna, and I think any hope on the ground here that this may be a very temporary break of that ceasefire has been dashed, both by what the Israeli government says it now intends to do against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also the realities on the ground. Overnight last night and again today there have been numerous airstrikes, particularly in the southern parts of Beirut, an area known as Dahir, a Hezbollah stronghold. Israel says it's not only targeting senior Hezbollah figures but also institutions, particularly financial institutions linked to Hezbollah, which Israel says the militant group, the Shia militant group, is using to finance terror operations and has been doing that for many years. Israel does seem to be determined to crush and defeat Hezbollah once and for all, perhaps not trusting the Lebanese government to uphold its part of the ceasefire deal and disarm Hezbollah. Of course, most people here in Lebanon are very angry that Hezbollah decided to retaliate for those attacks on Iran in the way it did by continuing to fire rockets and missiles into Israel. And the two other things that are happening now as a consequence of this continued action is that about 30,000 people have been internally displaced since the start of the attacks here 3 days ago. And of course the Lebanese government is anticipating that the Israelis will start an incursion into southern Lebanon in the coming hours and days to try and stop those Hezbollah attacks against northern Israel. So a lot going on, but I think no sense here that this is a temporary measure. A lot of people here expect this fighting and these airstrikes to last for quite a few days.
Wira, thank you. That's Wira Davis, our correspondent in Beirut. Hugo Beshega is in Tel Aviv. Hugo, are those regular barrages of Iranian missiles heading towards Israel continuing?
Yeah, and it's been a relatively quieter day today. We have heard the air raid alerts multiple times across the country, but there haven't been reports of major injuries or significant damage caused by those missiles that have been fired by Iran. Now, on the other hand, Israel has continued to attack Iran, and in the last hour there have been reports that one of the targets hit in Tehran was the building of the Assembly of Experts, which is the group of clerics that will select the new supreme leader. So we're still trying to waiting for more details about what exactly happened there. And we see that Iran has continued to respond, and earlier today an Iranian drone hit the American embassy in Saudi Arabia, and obviously Americans have been urged to leave this region, to essentially leave the Middle East, even though there's a lot of travel disruption because lots of airports remain closed. The airspace of a number of countries also closed because of these attacks. And we haven't heard from President Trump, from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a clear plan, a clear, clear objectives for this conflict. We've heard from President Trump yesterday, who said that this conflict could last 4-5 weeks. The indications from Israeli officials is that this could be a prolonged conflict. They've been talking about regime change in Iran, and we're not seeing any kind of off-ramp in this conflict, any kind of opportunity to see a de-escalation in this conflict.
Hugo Beshega, thank you in Tel Aviv, and thanks to Wira Davis, our correspondent in Beirut. Well, Donald Trump and Marco Rubio have indicated that Operation Epic Fury, as they call it, could become even more intense, and it's having a real impact here in the Middle East. It's worth saying, just over my shoulder, you can see a long, low building. That is the US Embassy that was temporarily evacuated last night because of a drone threat. And in fact, the skies here in Jordan, where I am, are quiet at the moment because they've decided to close their airspace to protect against that Iranian missile threat. And Sumi Samaskanda is outside the White House. Sumi, US citizens are being told to leave not just Jordan, where I am, but countries right across the Middle East. That just demonstrates, doesn't it, that even the US at the moment seems to not quite know which direction this is going in.
That's right, Anna, and we were monitoring late last night as those two drones, we understood, hit the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. And we understand they caused only minor damage, but it just goes to show just the unpredictability of where this conflict is heading. And indeed, we've seen the State Department, Marco Rubio, advise American citizens across the region to leave immediately. Well, of course, that would involve a concerted effort, but because it is difficult with flights being canceled across the region at the moment, they are urging Americans to get on commercial flights and leave. How easy that will be remains to be seen. But it comes as you mentioned there, it appears President Trump, his administration, are intent upon continuing this conflict, and that the hits will be harder than before, as we heard from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. We have also seen President Trump say today on Truth Social, we have destroyed their Air Force, their Navy. They want to talk, but it's too late. That does echo what we've heard from the president in the last few days on social media when he has said they were stringing us along in negotiations. They had no intent, the Iranians, on really coming to an agreement on terms that we could accept. And so this attack was necessary. But we know as well that we've seen a shifting array of, let's say, objectives for this conflict from the U.S. perspective, and also justifications. Perhaps the most interesting from the Secretary of State himself, Marco Rubio, when he was on Capitol Hill on Monday, saying, well, we understood that the Israelis were going to attack, and that would then create reprisals for the U.S., that we had to get ahead of any reprisals from the Iranians to protect Americans, American bases in the region. All of that, of course, will be very much in focus today, later in the afternoon, when the full Congress, so the House of Representatives and the Senate, will receive a briefing. Secretary Rubio will be part of that again, and they will have many questions for him on the justification, on the legal basis of this conflict. We know that Democrats in the Senate in particular want to bring forward a vote on a war powers resolution so that the president would need authorization from Congress to be able to continue operations in Iran. Now, at the moment, it doesn't look like that is going to have enough votes. It's mostly just the Democrats at the moment who have supported that. But we will be watching that a little bit later. As this morning, we're going to see the German chancellor here with President Trump. And of course, Europe's role in all of this is very much in focus today, as Donald Trump has criticized Sir Keir Starmer again for not showing full support in the early stages of the attacks on Iran. He told the Sun newspaper that the prime minister had, quote, not been very helpful. So that messaging from the president, as we also heard critical words from the Senator Lindsey Graham earlier. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Damian Grammaticus, on this story. Damian, what are you hearing there on this criticism from President Trump?
Well, Sumi, I was at a briefing with Prime Minister Keir Starmer's official spokesperson in Downing Street just a couple of hours ago, where he was asked about that. And he basically said that the Prime Minister here of the UK had been faced with a decision, had taken a decision in before those initial strikes. He said based on putting British interests first, and in doing so, he referred to what Keir Starmer had told Parliament yesterday, which is that meant the UK, from the UK's experience, there were two tests that need to be met. One was any action legal, and the second was it part of a coherent plan? Now, what the Prime Minister implied by that then is that he didn't think those tests had been met, and that was why he hadn't given the authorization in the first place for the US to fly long-range bombers out of an airbase in the UK and the base that the UK and the US share in the Indian Ocean in Diego Garcia. That is what obviously annoyed Donald Trump. But Prime Minister Keir Starmer making clear, and his spokesperson, that they had then decided, following a second request, that once Iran was firing missiles and drones and targeting Gulf countries, targeting civilians, hotels, airports, that British citizens, British interests, British allies were all at risk. At that point, the UK has given permission for use of those bases for defensive actions, which means targeting the missile launchers, the missile sites, that sort of thing. So they draw a sharp distinction, but that obviously hasn't still pleased President Trump.